There comes a moment on the empath's journey when the body begins to tell the truth the mind denied for years. It's the instant when the heart, tired of carrying the weight of the world, starts whispering, "Enough." But an empath's enough rarely comes with anger. It comes with exhaustion, an exhaustion so deep it seems to touch the soul. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, when the psyche, after years of serving others' expectations, initiates a silent rebellion against self-abandonment. It's not the world rejecting you, it's your soul beginning to claim you back. You may know this feeling. After a lifetime of saying yes to keep the peace, a simple no seems to ruin everything. People pull away, families get upset, friends call you selfish. But what's really happening isn't loss, it's revelation. You're not losing relationships, you're discovering which ones depended on your absence. Neuroscience studies, like those by Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA, show that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why, when you start choosing yourself, the emptiness hurts as if the ground vanished beneath you. But this pain is a birth, not an ending. It announces the emergence of what you've always been, but never lived. A whole being, able to love without dissolving, to care without erasing yourself. So if lately you feel like you're losing everyone, maybe something deeper is happening. You're finally choosing peace. In the comments, write, "I'm discovering who was real." Chapter 1. The Boundary Crisis. When the brain reads rejection as physical pain. There's a point in every empath's life when the body decides what consciousness still fears to admit. No one can keep giving without boundaries and stay healthy. This is the threshold where the empathic soul awakens, not in triumph, but in collapse. The body starts to fail, symptoms pile up, and the exhausted mind realizes something essential was forgotten, the right to exist for oneself. Jung described this moment as a rebellion of the psyche against the servant role. It's the instant when the unconscious, saturated with silence, raises its voice and demands balance. In Elizabeth's case, a sensitive woman who carried others' pain for 15 years, this rebellion arrived as an inexplicable illness, panic attacks, migraines, fatigue. No doctor found a physical cause. But Jung saw beyond. It wasn't the body that was sick, it was the soul trying to survive. When Elizabeth followed the simple guidance to say no just once, the world's reaction was devastating. An offended sister, a guilt-tripping mother, a husband's heavy silence. In a few days, the circle that looked like love dissolved into accusations. "You've changed. What happened to you?" An empath's first boundary doesn't destroy the world. It reveals what in it was false. Neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. Research by Naomi Eisenberger at the University of California shows that the human brain reacts to social rejection with the same pattern as physical pain. When someone pulls away after you set a boundary, the limbic system, especially the anterior cingulate cortex, interprets it as a survival threat. That's why no hurts. Not because you did something wrong, but because the brain confuses aloneness with danger. Yet while the brain fights to preserve the old, the self, that wise center of the psyche Jung described, fights to be born. The boundary crisis is, in truth, a psychic birth. It's the moment when the soul, suffocated by years of self-abandonment, finally begins to breathe. And like every birth, it comes with pain, fear, and disorientation. But what looks like the end of everything is only the beginning of integrity. When you start choosing yourself, the unconscious reorganizes. The old role of all-giving caretaker loosens its grip. The body, once an instrument of servitude, becomes a temple of awareness. And the emptiness that opens isn't rejection, it's space. Space for true connection to happen, no longer based on need but on presence. So if today your heart throbs with loneliness because you said your first no, breathe. The pain you feel isn't punishment. It's the first breath of someone who finally returned to themselves. Chapter 2, The Unveiling of Invisible Contracts. When an empath says the first no, the world around them begins to show its true face. It's not that people change, it's that you start to see what was once obscured by the fog of need. The unveiling is that delicate moment when the invisible contracts sustaining your relationship surface. Contracts you never consciously signed, yet that governed every bond. I abandon myself, and in return you call me good. I solve your crises, and in return you give me belonging. I never confront you, and you offer me love. These are the silent clauses forming the emotional prison of many empaths. When Elizabeth, Jung's patient, refused to take her sister's call, it wasn't just a conversation that ended. It was a pact that broke. Suddenly, she saw that her presence in others' lives was conditioned on her absence from herself, and that rupture, necessary as it was, triggered the ancestral fear of abandonment. Jung said the collective unconscious carries in all of us the terror of being expelled from the tribe. In ancient times, rejection meant death. That's why, when you start saying enough, the soul panics and the body reacts as if in danger. But the danger is illusory. You're not being punished, you're being freed. Dr. Harriet Lerner, a scholar of relational systems, observed that in codependent families, an act of differentiation is perceived as a threat to equilibrium. When one member begins to heal, everyone else feels they're losing control. Thus, the awakening empath becomes a mirror, reflecting what others don't want to see, their own stagnation. But this discomfort is sacred. It's the first light after years of emotional submission. It reflects the truth that real love doesn't depend on sacrificing your soul, but on the meeting of two whole presences. During the unveiling, many will feel guilt, others anger. Some will try to convince you you're being cold or selfish. But in reality, you're just ending a contract that was never fair. And this is when the unconscious begins to test your courage. Will you betray yourself again for fear of losing love? Or will you hold the silence and let the masks fall? The unveiling isn't a punishment, it's a revelation. And like every revelation, it asks for the courage to look at what was always there, but can only now be seen with the eyes of an awakened soul. Chapter 3. The test, when the system tries to pull you back. After the unveiling comes the test. The universe watches in silence. Are you truly ready to stay whole? Forces around you start moving to re-establish the old equilibrium, not out of malice, but out of fear. Systems always seek stability, even if that stability costs you your soul. That's what happened with Elizabeth. Right after the first no came the counter-moves. Her sister showing up at the door, her husband turning quiet and cold, her mother gathering the family to discuss her worrying change. This is when the empath feels the whole world has turned against them. But Jung said, everyone's unconscious reacts when one of us begins to change. One person's transformation unsettles everyone else's unconscious balance. This period is the most dangerous, not because it threatens relationships, but because it threatens the dependency pact that held them together. Those who benefited from your unconditional yes will try to push you back into the old role, the savior, the good one, the ever-available. They'll do it using your own shadows, guilt, pity, fear of rejection. The unconscious tactics vary, but share the same purpose, to bring you back to emotional servitude. Guilt, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. Emotional blackmail, you're so cold. What happened to your heart? Drama, crises staged to reactivate your caretaking reflex. And the threat, if it's like this, don't count on me anymore. But what's being tested isn't love, it's the boundary. Here you must remember Jung's teaching. We can care about another's feelings without making them our responsibility. Being empathic does not mean being absorbed. It means seeing another's pain without having to die inside it. True compassion includes you. During the test, the body reacts. You feel the weight of the old role trying to reinstall itself. The mind wants to cave, the heart feels guilty, and silence seems cruel. But this is the portal of emotional maturity, the point at which you learn to sustain discomfort without fleeing yourself. Few cross this portal because love is mistaken for obedience, empathy for self-erasure. Yet here, precisely here, true love is born, in the courage to keep loving without abandoning yourself. The test, then, isn't about proving strength. It's about proving presence. And if you remain trembling, doubting, you'll discover something that changes everything. The bonds that survive this fire are the ones that truly deserve to exist. Chapter 4, Sorting. Who transforms, who accepts, and who leaves. After you hold steady through the test, the silence begins to reorganize. The voices that once shouted start to recede, and a new kind of space opens within you. It's not the emptiness of abandonment, it's the fertile emptiness of clarity. This is where the third phase begins, sorting. Jung said, "Whatever is not made conscious returns as fate." When you bring patterns of self-abandonment into awareness, relationships inevitably get rewritten, but not all will survive the truth. Elizabeth lived through this quiet triage. Within months, ties that seemed solid revealed their fragility. Her sister responded with rising hostility. Every no felt like rejection. Her mother, confused, tried to adapt, learning to respect the new boundaries. Her husband, after a long period of resistance, finally broke the silence and started to look within. That trio symbolized what every empath experiences, the ones who transform, the ones who accept, and the ones who leave. The husband, the transformer, confronted with his own emptiness, he chose to grow. Pain led him to introspection, and together they rebuilt a relationship where love was no longer a debt, but a choice. The mother, the acceptor. Without fully understanding, she learned to respect. Phone calls grew shorter, meetings lighter. The bond lost intensity but gained honesty. The sister, the one who leaves. Unable to handle the new balance, she withdrew in resentment. And in that withdrawal, Elizabeth realized something essential. It wasn't rejection, it was liberation. Jung saw a sacred function in the pain of loss. He called it the transcendent function, the power to unite opposites and create something new out of destruction. In sorting, that's what happens. The old dies so the real can be born. Modern research confirms what Jung intuited. Studies of highly sensitive people show that after establishing healthy boundaries, about half of initial bonds dissolve. But those that remain become significantly more nourishing and reciprocal. Quantity decreases, quality flourishes. This is the moment the empath matures emotionally. They understand they can no longer measure love by the intensity of attachment, but by the freedom to stay true. They realize that losing some is the sacred price of finding themselves. So, if a few doors are closing today, don't rush to reopen them. Maybe what's leaving isn't love. It's the old contract with your own absence. Let go of what can't bear your truth. What's genuine is never offended by your wholeness. In the comments, share. What remains when I choose truth? That question is the turning point between loss and return. Chapter 5. The Trap of Isolation. When aloneness disguises itself as evolution. After surviving the apparent losses, an empath may feel held by a new kind of peace, a silence that at first glance seems like serenity. But sometimes that peace is just a defense in disguise. The danger is no longer the other who invades you, but the emptiness you've erected between yourself and the world. Jung encountered this many times in his patients. He called it spiritual inflation, when consciousness, newly freed from pain, believes itself above human relationships. That's what happened with Hinrich, a man who, after breaking free from a destructive family, became a prisoner of his own superiority. For months, Hinrich cultivated what he called absolute peace. He cut every tie, ceased all contact, distanced himself from friends, love, and community. He told Jung, "I'm finally at peace, free from all toxicity." Jung looked him in the eyes and asked, "And who's left in there?" Hinrich replied, "Only me, and that's enough." In that moment, Jung understood the man had confused autonomy with isolation. The ego, wounded by years of abuse, was now wearing the cloak of spiritual arrogance, convinced it no longer needed anyone. But individuation, Jung taught, does not separate. It connects. It teaches you to be alone without feeling cut off from life. Isolation is subtle because it masquerades as evolution. You start to believe no one understands you, that everyone else is unconscious, that relating is a loss of energy. But behind that spiritualized narrative is fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of needing, fear of trusting. This is where healing turns into escape. The empath who once got lost in serving now gets lost in self-protection. Both are prisons of the same wounded ego. Jung noted that during this stage, the unconscious sends signals, dreams of deserts, empty houses, shuttered windows, symbols of a soul that built walls around itself. Over time, isolation exacts its price, the return of anxiety, a diffuse sadness, the weight of disconnection. True peace isn't the absence of bonds, it's presence without imprisonment. You didn't come to earth to be invulnerable, but to be true. To be whole is to be able to be alone and still open, to be able to love without losing yourself, to be able to touch without being invaded. Isolation is the echo of trauma. Individuation is the birth of communion. So if you feel you've pulled away from everyone, ask yourself gently, am I truly at peace or just afraid to come closer? Because evolution isn't solitude, it's encounter, and no one becomes whole alone. Chapter 6, Reconstruction and Conscious Community, the Birth of Reciprocal Relationships. After the desert of aloneness, something begins to sprout quietly, a fragile but real bud, the possibility of a new kind of bond. Reconstruction doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small gestures, a conversation without strain, a look that doesn't demand, a meeting where silence feels comfortable. After so long carrying the world, the empath starts to discover what it's like to be seen without having to give themselves away. That's how Elizabeth met Marie, a simple, awake woman who listened without hurry and spoke without invading. When they met for the first time, there was no intensity, no drama, only presence. And that lightness, which Elizabeth would once have mistaken for coldness, now felt like a miracle. There, for the first time, was reciprocity. Jung called this moment the transcendent function, the point at which opposites unite, autonomy and intimacy, independence and affection, silence and sharing, coexisting without conflict. It's the alchemy of the mature soul. Marie could say no without guilt, and Elizabeth could hear it without feeling rejected. Both had learned what most fear, that love is only possible between two whole beings. Reconstruction is more than finding people again. It's relearning how to belong. After years of need-based relationships, the empath must practice new ways of connecting, relationships where yes rises from desire, not obligation. Conversations where silence isn't a threat, but a breath. Presence that nourishes, not drains. Elizabeth created what she called a boundary audit, a small monthly practice to stay conscious. She asked herself, does this relationship nourish me or drain me? Is there reciprocity, or am I overcaring again? Can I be authentic here? These simple questions became her compass. Over time, new bonds emerged, not because she sought them out, but because her energy changed. She stopped vibrating with the need to be chosen and began to attract those who had also done their inner work. In Jungian psychology, we call this archetypal resonance, the self recognizing the self in the other. You attract what resonates with the level of consciousness you sustain. Reconstruction, therefore, isn't a return to the old world. It's the birth of a new one, where empathy is conscious and love is free. The awakened empath understands that helping another doesn't mean saving them, and that caring for oneself isn't selfish, it's honest. When you learn to be whole within yourself, the universe brings you people who don't need to consume you to feel alive. They are souls who walk beside you, not on top of you. And on that ground, conscious community is born, where being real matters more than being admired. Chapter 7. Integration, being separable so you can love. There's a calm that only arrives after the chaos. It doesn't come from control or certainty, it comes from presence. After the storm of ruptures, silences, and reconstruction, there's a moment when the awakened empath realizes you don't have to choose between being alone and being with others. The secret is to be separable and still choose connection. Jung called this the true aim of individuation, the capacity to be whole without closing off, to relate without dissolving. It's the point where I and you stop being threats and become conscious mirrors. When Elizabeth reached this point, she described something simple yet revealing. I wake up unafraid. I drink my coffee in silence, sometimes alone, sometimes with someone, but in both, I feel whole. This is integration. Life resumes, but on another level of awareness. Encounters are chosen, not imposed. Time alone stops being loneliness and becomes fertile soil for the soul. Routine takes on a sacred rhythm, small rituals of self-care and presence. No longer comes with guilt. Yes is spontaneous and true. Elizabeth learned what Jung often told his patients: individuation does not isolate, it differentiates. To be separable is to know where your responsibility ends and another's begins. It's being able to love with clear boundaries, to help without emptying yourself, to listen without absorbing. She created 3 simple practices to sustain this state. 1 monthly boundary review, not to judge herself, but to notice where the old pattern tries to return. 2, relationship assessment. Ask, is there reciprocity here? Can I be truthful in this space? 3, ongoing support. Keep a circle of consciousness. Therapy, study group, spiritual community, where clarity is nourished. Integration isn't a finish line, but a state of loving vigilance. It's the dynamic balance between giving and receiving, between silence and speech, between inner and outer. In this space, the empath stops living in reaction to the world and starts co-creating their reality with it. Being separable is what finally makes love possible. Only someone whole can truly choose another, not out of fear or lack, but out of freedom. That's when love stops being a contract and becomes communion. In the end, Elizabeth didn't become less empathic. She became consciously empathic. And that's what the world most needs: whole people who love with presence and withdraw with respect, who help with clarity and rest without guilt. Conclusion: the privilege of being whole. At the end of the crossing, there are no fireworks, no promises of happily ever after. There's just a new silence, the sound of the heart beating again in rhythm with the soul. It's the instant when the empath understands that peace was never the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's what Elizabeth and so many of us came to learn, that loving isn't carrying another, but walking beside them. That helping isn't self-erasure, but sharing presence. That a conscious no is a form of love as deep as yes. The aloneness that once felt like a desert becomes sacred ground where the self and the whole finally meet. You didn't lose the world. You simply stopped participating in stories that required your absence. Now you begin writing a new narrative, one of loving without abandoning yourself, serving without burning out, and choosing without fear. Those who stayed, and those who will come, will recognize in you something beyond explanation. A steady presence, a soul that doesn't need to be understood to be felt. So if this journey resonated with you, breathe, let silence hold you, and write in the comments, "I choose truth and peace," because it's at this point that transformation stops being theory and becomes destiny. Life isn't taking anything from you, it's simply giving you back to yourself.